So within 24 hours, of course, this crazy mad bomber, the usual suspect in their case, is released without charge. He claims that he was just trying to help the police by calling them and notifying them about some of the vagaries of maybe a resistance movement or a protest movement that might exist in his part of the country. Big mistake. You figure you would have learned something the first time they threw you in jail over all this stuff. You're not going to go to the police to talk or to confess or to help them out. Generally what you're doing is putting a rope around your neck and walking towards the gallows, if there was still such a thing. So hardly not something to be recommended you try at home or with the RCMP. They just don't have a really good sense of humor. So Weibo, it looks like you didn't do it after all, and a lot of money and a lot of effort was put into turning your house upside down, looking for some sort of evidence that didn't exist, and I guess they're barking up the wrong tree. We'll see what happens down the road if they want to take another stab at it. Our other good dictator-in-chief, Mr. Harper, is still standing behind his proroguing of Parliament. There's a lot of protests are going to be happening down the road very, very shortly in pretty much all cities around Canada. And Toronto's scheduled for one as well. What is a terrible thing is a lot of people just don't seem to grasp the deeper strategy. One of the deeper parts of the strategy that disturbed me is his buddies, the Bilderbergs. The Bilderbergs who control the press, and if you know which press are controlled by the Bilderbergs, when you see them all mounting a united front, you have to realize that something's wrong, especially when they're mounting this front outside of Canada. Like, who in Britain really cares if our Prime Minister is proroguing Parliament? You know, like, not your country. There's no concern. None of these laws will apply to you. None of these people, you know, are doing anything with your tax dollars. So why would it be important for The Economist and some of the other major newspapers in Britain to make an issue out of this? Very simple. Their Bilderberg masters have told them so, as well as our own mainstream media. The Globe has attended Bilderberg meetings, the Star, the National Post. I'm sure from high levels they've been told to make an issue out of this. And then you just have to realize it's a red herring, that someone's trying to get you to do something for reasons that you don't understand and probably don't suit your long-term collective interests. So you have to be very suspicious on why they're getting you to go and protest and battle this. I look at it almost with heartfelt thanks, as some of the bills that are the most heinous bills ever to come before Parliament have fallen off the table. Bill C-6 falls off the table. Bill C-60, just an abomination where we're going to give American law enforcement RCMP powers in Canada. Like I say, I will just be laughing my head off when the Alabama Highway Patrol goes into somebody's house and just kicks the door in and knocks them around good. Or maybe when the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms gets in a big gunfight in downtown Toronto and just leave. Just say, you assholes, you clean it up. You brought us here. We're going home. There's nothing you can do to us because we're the RCMP in this country. We don't answer to anyone. So that would be a very, very, very terrible state of affairs. Of course, for Mr. Harper's strategy, he gets to load the Senate and put more conservative senators in there so that we can't do much about some of the bills that may come back in time. But I feel those bills are going to get passed anyway, because the Senate can only send them back to Parliament. They're under no obligation to really do anything the Senate says. So even with a Liberal majority, if they send Bill C-6 back and say, do this, do that, do this, it could just be a volleyball match until that bill is ultimately passed, or the senators get a little more pressure put upon them, or they load the deck. The big thing is, when you're dealing with laws that are totally unconstitutional, and deprive people of their basic human rights, something that even though I despise the UN, we are signatories on universal human rights declarations, you just say, fung gu la. We're not going to obey laws like that, and you just go about your business. If they want to put a big fence up around us and lock up 30-something million people and say, well, you know, you're all prisoners, well, we're all prisoners. Screw you, pal. We're not going to do it. We're not the slightest bit. If I want to have my colloidal silver, I'm going to make colloidal silver, and I'm going to buy colloidal silver, and I don't really give a rat's ass what some dickhead who's paid off by some big corporation does in Ottawa. Like, you can blow smoke until the cows come home. Who says we're going to obey these laws? We just become resistors, 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 resistors for everything they do. So it really doesn't matter how much money these big corporations put into our governments and our leaders, because we're not going to follow them. And one of the other advantages is we can have alternative medias to say, we're not going to follow your programming or brainwashing or propaganda anymore either. We're going to turn the channel. Maybe we'll turn the channel to that channel. And maybe we won't listen to the Bilderberg-controlled press and the Bilderberg-controlled media. And then they'll just fall by the wayside, and there'll be a whole new paradigm. We see our good buddy, the Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, has been charged with an offence for this Caledonia incident. A private charge was laid by Gary McHale. He was a former Douglas Creek Estates incident. So Mr. Fantino was supposed to be exercising some muscle on the town council of Caledonia, threatening to withdraw police services and sue them and whatever. It's not a good thing. It's against the law, actually, so he was charged. Of course, the Premier is going to stand behind him. Wonder why. Usually when you're charged, just as a matter of good grace and gentlemanly conduct, just to show. I remember one of my instructors from the London Met just said, not only must justice be done, but justice must appear to be done. That was his standard. So I don't think we're getting any justice, and we're definitely not seeing something where we're appearing to have justice. Because the Premier says Mr. Fantino can still hold office even though he is accused in this incident involving elected politicians. That isn't right. He should resign just as a gentleman, as a matter of good conscience, until this is settled. That's how we used to call our politicians honorable a long time ago. But they're no longer honorable, they're dishonorable. So that's why we see something like this. But what are some of the other things that could be behind it? Mr. Fantino seems to be in a crunch position because he was the chief of Toronto Police when they were investigating this Toronto 18 terrorism debacle, which was probably a false flag operation. We see that one of the trials is going on of the so-called ringleader. They bought a witness for $4 million. For $4 million, you could probably buy busloads of people to kill him, never mind just talk about him in court and present evidence. Then, of course, we see another individual, Robert Baltovich, who was accused of killing his girlfriend Elizabeth Bain, who's someone who just happened to know Paul Bernardo, coming back on track. Well, the government isn't going to give him any money. The government won't settle for his wrongful conviction. No, that's still a driving force. And I think we all know why. Mr. Ray was Premier back in those days. It was almost like a police state for information about the Bernardo trial. There was a complete prohibition order. We had to get our news from the United States. Stuff had to be smuggled across the border so we could find out about it. Professor O'Driscoll made some rather stark revelations about Premier Ray. Is it any wonder why we can't have Commissioner Fantino suspended, why we have to stand behind him? Because he's their boy, I think. Mr. McGuinty had a lot of problems losing money at eHealth. It's only $1 billion of our tax dollars. Dance companies dance. One leads, one follows, then they change places. And the reason I think he's there is just to cover up for the crimes that are going on at Queen's Park anyway, as they befuddle our money away from us and then bring in this godly HST, which I will use as the holy shit tax. Because as it comes on and it comes out of your pockets, I think that's about all you're going to say is, holy shit, holy shit, how much tax have I got to pay? Because it's going to be on a lot of things you never saw a tax on before. Terrible. Now we see Yemen coming in. That's going to be the new battlefield of the New World Order. lot of good stuff going on in Yemen. That's been a hotbed of activity. Back in the good old days, it was part of the Soviet bloc, so that's why there was a little bit of